The centerpiece of the mountain region is the White Mountain National Forest. It was created in 1911 and today provides the largest tract of public land on the East Coast. Ranger Steve Chandler is an expert on the ever-changing moods of these mountains.
The White Mountain National Forest is special to me because it's the people's forest. The White Mountain National Forest was created as a result of the land abuses in this area when the timber barons were operating. And folks like the Appalachian Mountain Club, concerned citizens, the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests, and others banded together to eventually produce what was called the Weeks Law. And in 1911, the Weeks Law made it possible to create national forests in the East United States. I think the first thing that probably people think the most about when they think about the special places in the White Mountains are the above timberline areas that exist on the Presidential Range, and probably the foremost point there is Mount Washington. I think everybody in New England tries to get to see Mount Washington in their life at least once. But there are other areas that are really neat too. We have a myriad of brooks and streams. I love the mountains because of the names. These are wild streams in the spring. The Mad River, the Swift River, the Wild River. They all talk about descriptively how these streams act every spring. What strikes me about the White Mountain is its violent weather. I love the violent weather. It can change dramatically. We can have snow, and I think this year we'll have a mix of fall foliage colors and snow on the higher peaks, making just a beautiful situation. Weather systems butt heads right above these mountains and make for these spectacular displays of Mother Nature, whether it's a snowstorm or a northeaster, as they call them, blizzards, or the spectacular thunder showers, or whatever. It just adds to the whole element of what you find on this forest. People traveling to and through the White Mountain National Forest will find all kinds of things. I think we're probably most well known because foliage season, which I think it's obvious from where I'm standing, you're going to see some foliage that people come, everybody in New England, I think, comes to this area to see the foliage and to see the streams. But we're primarily a pedestrian forest. The White Mountain National Forest has over 1,200 miles of foot trails available to the hikers. And I think those people who exert themselves a little bit will be the ones that enjoy the most because they will find some solitude, if you will. They can find extreme solitude in some of our designated wilderness areas, like the Great Gulf, the first one on the forest, the Pemigewasset Wilderness, which is 45,000 acres in size, and is the largest national forest wilderness east of the Mississippi. There is wildlife that you can observe along the highway at different times of the year. The White Mountain has all kinds of backcountry. There are things that you can see off the road that you won't see from the highway's edge. Many of our trails follow stream courses. The East Branch of the Pemigewasset River is a beautiful stream, enjoyable both in winter and summer. To see the water, to see it with the absence of other people if you want to exert yourself a little bit. There are glacially created pools on the upper Ammonoosuc River, for example, where the rocks have swirled in the current and have drilled holes in the granite that are rather spectacular. Perhaps the only season that gets skipped a little bit is the mud season in the spring, as we call it around here, when everything turns wet. But you shouldn't miss that either, because the smells of spring are rather spectacular, as are the smells of fall. The leaves are on the ground and begin to decay, particularly in the wetland areas. So there's something to be seen, and as more people discover what's available on the forest year-round, we see people all 4 seasons of the year enjoying their forest.
For those wishing to explore the backcountry of the White Mountains, there's a unique resource. That is the series of overnight huts maintained by the Appalachian Mountain Club. 100 years ago, the Appalachian Mountain Club was founded to help people explore and appreciate the Northeast wilderness, and it maintains an extensive set of hiking trails throughout the White Mountains. Spaced along these trails, no more than a good day's walk from each other, are a series of huts where hikers can stop for the night, sleep on good bunk beds, and find breakfast and dinner without having to cook for themselves. Al Folger has been part of the hut system for over 50 years.
The mountains are like a home to me, all the White Mountains. And no matter where I am, I feel at home. And I travel a lot alone here, and I learn a lot when I'm on a trail, just thinking, and it gives you a lot of time to think and kind of equalize your life a bit. You get away from the valley, your problems in the valley, and here you are up in the mountains. And so you enjoy the mountains, and that's what I do. The Appalachian Mountain Club was formed in 1876 to try to preserve this great area of the White Mountains. Their base was in Boston, but their heart was in the White Mountains. And in so doing, they've, over the period of years, they've established this hut system which brings people up here and educates them and takes care of them so that they get back down safely as well as climb mountains.
The icy fastness at the peak of Mount Washington has long held fascination for New Englanders. In 1642, when the colonies were just starting, a young Irishman named Darby Fields set out from Portland, Maine, into the wilderness beyond to see what was atop the Crystal Hills glowing on the horizon. His was the first recorded ascent. The Indians of the area wanted no part of the high mountain peaks. They were considered to be homes for the gods. For the next 150 years, the high mountains were left alone. They were of no economic use to the colonists. But by the early 1800s, the crowded cities of the Northeast were causing people to yearn for the romantic purity of mountain air. Abel Crawford was one of the earliest settlers around the base of the Presidentials. In 1803, he built the first inn for travelers coming through what was eventually to be called Crawford Notch. His son, Ethan Allen Crawford, cut the first trail to the top of Mount Washington in 1819 to accommodate the increasing flow of visitors who wanted to reach the summit. It was up this trail that Ethan Allen led a group of New Hampshire politicians who heartily toasted the Republic's first presidents with liberal tots of rum and decided to name these peaks for the great leaders, hence their title, the Presidential Range. From north to south, these peaks are Madison, Adams, Jefferson, Washington, and Monroe. That trail, the Crawford Path, is still in use today and is the oldest continually used trail in America. By the 1830s, the first guidebook to the White Mountains was published. And with the coming of the railroads and steamships to the lakes, this mountain region grew into one of America's premier resorts. Grand hotels were built around the base of the Presidentials, and the serious development on the mountain started. The most striking image of that era was the Grand Resort Hotel. The last of these grand hotels is the venerable Mount Washington Hotel at Bretton Woods. Even the top of Mount Washington has its own history as a destination resort. By 1852, the first hotel was built on top of the mountain to accommodate the large number of visitors in season. In fact, demand to get up Mount Washington was so great that in 1854 a corporation was formed to build a carriage road to the summit from the Pinkham Notch side. This road became an engineering marvel of the age. In those early days, the ascent of Mount Washington was by carriage or stagecoach. In the slower Victorian times, this ascent must have been a thrill indeed. The first automobile reached the summit in 1899, and it wasn't too long before it ceased to be the carriage road and became the Mount Washington Auto Road. It's still one of the region's premier attractions. This road is almost 8 miles long, and the last few miles are well above tree line. The trip up has been literally a high point of many a tour of New England. Some visitors like to drive it themselves. But again, for the more civilized traveler, there's a fleet of motorized stages that will drive you to the top and provide a guided tour on the way. In the greatest period of development on the mountain, a road was not the only novelty. On the other side of the mountain in Crawford Notch, a novel idea for a railroad was being formed. The cog railway was completed in 1869 and has been in almost continuous operation. It works by a ratcheting process that drives the engine uphill along a series of cogs in the track, pushing the passenger car before it. Today, the trip on the cog railroad is very much like it has been for over 130 years. The little train inches its way up the 3.5 miles of track in about an hour and a half, unless there is a long delay waiting for one of the downward trains. For the latter part of the last century and the beginning of this one, an adventurous visit to Mount Washington included a ride up the cog railway, a night at the Tip-Top House or Summit House, and a ride down the carriage road to the other side. One travel guide of the period even listed 10 different itineraries for accomplishing that same adventure. Today, as in those earlier times, the goal is the same: to join the legion of visitors following in the footsteps of Darby Field, wishing to stand atop New England on the summit of Mount Washington. The Arctic-like environment at the top of the mountain also made it a mecca for scientific study. Botanists visited to see the alpine plants, and others came to study the varieties of weather. The first scientific expedition to the top of the mountain was in 1784, and by 1871, scientists wintered over on the mountain, which led to the establishment of the Mount Washington Observatory in 1874. Daily record-keeping and year-round observation was now a permanent feature of the mountain. Today, there is still a Mount Washington Observatory, which is now attached to the State Park Summit building.
My name is Ken.
In the little town of Franconia, you can find a unique landmark to New England's artistic history. Here, early in his literary career, writing his first books of poems, no modern writer has defined New England more completely than Frost. And today, his house is a museum and testament to his wry sensibility, expressed early on in the poem, New Hampshire.
If I must choose which I would elevate, the people or the already lofty mountains, I'd elevate the already lofty mountains. The only fault I find with old New Hampshire is that her mountains aren't quite high enough. I was not always so, I've come to be so. How, to my sorrow, how have I attained a height from which to look down critical on mountains? What has given me assurance to say what height becomes New Hampshire mountains, or any mountains? Can it be some strength I feel as of an earthquake in my back to heave them higher to the morning star? Can it be foreign travel in the Alps? Or having seen and credited a moment the solid molding of vast peaks of cloud behind pitiful reality of Lincoln, Lafayette, and Liberty? Or some such sense as says, how high shall jet the fountain in proportion to the basin? No, none of these has raised me to my throne of intellectual dissatisfaction, but the sad accident of having seen our actual mountains given in a map of early times as twice the height they are. 10,000 feet instead of only 5, which shows how sad an accident may be. 5,000 feet is no longer high enough. Whereas I never had a good idea about improving people in the world, here I am, over-fertile in suggestion, and cannot rest from planning day or night how high I'd thrust the peaks in summer snow, to tap the upper sky and draw a flow of frosty night air on the vale below, down from the stars, to freeze the dew as starry. The more the sensiblest I am, the more I seem to want my mountains wild. For all the mountains fall a little short, her people not quite short enough for art. She's still New Hampshire, a most restful state.